Before we begin, we want to take a moment to thank our sponsors at Audible. Now that the weather's getting nicer, I'm back to reading and listening to books in the park. And with Audible, it's never been easier. Every month, I get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection. In addition, I get access to news digests from the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. If you go to audibletrial.com/YMO podcast, you'll get 2 free audiobooks on us. Download thousands of titles offline anytime, anywhere. Having trouble deciding what to pick? Audible lets you keep your credits for up to a year. Find your summer read and support your favorite National Film Registry podcast. Once again, that's audibletrial.com/YMO podcast. Thank you for your support.
And now, on with the show.
Gentlemen, what's a pop culture phenomenon that was spoofed where you saw the spoof first?
So for me, my answer is actually twofold. It's 2 things in one. So if anybody remembers the show Animaniacs, they used to do a lot of different segments and skits on Animaniacs. One of the recurring bits they had, because Animaniacs ran when I was a kid, and now it's back, it's on Hulu, it's good, but was they had a skit, a recurring skit they would do called The Good Feathers. You know, on a show for kids. And it was 3 pigeons that were parodies of De Niro, Liotta, and Pesci from Goodfellas. And, like, they would just do fucking Goodfellas the same way that, like, old Looney Tunes cartoons would do, like, Abbott and Costello and shit. And you just had these moments of, every time you would have a bit where the Pesci pigeon would do, funny how? How am I funny? What am I funny to you? And the Liotta pigeon was made a little dumber. So I was fascinated by that. I remember asking my mom every time it would come, I'm like, what is that? And she'd go, it's Goodfellas. And I'd be like, can I watch it? And she would say no, because I was a child, and it's Goodfellas. But one Goodfeathers segment they did involved, because I think their names were like Jimmy, Pesto, and Squit, or I know Pesto and Squit were them. Squit, the Liotta character, and one of them falls in love with another bird from a different breed of bird. And I remember this vividly. Her name was Carluta, and he starts singing the song Maria from West Side Story about this bird Carluta. So I asked my mom, like, what's this? And she goes, West Side Story. And they did the whole thing with the pigeons snapping their feathers and all. And she says, West Side Story. And I was like, can I watch that? And she said, yeah, fine, I guess. Because I guess she was just tired of saying no to Goodfellas. So I knew Goodfellas from Goodfeathers. Did not see Goodfellas for several years after that. And the reason I ever saw West Side Story for the first time was because they spoofed it on Goodfeathers. And so we went to Blockbuster and rented the original film. It's a twofold answer, West Side Story and Goodfellas, both thanks to Animaniacs.
Okay, that's actually pretty funny because mine is twofold. It's not as connected as yours, but there's 2 that I felt I needed to say because these 2 things ended up getting tattooed on my body. Because one, we all saw Space Jam when we were children, and there was a bit where they reference Pulp Fiction. And I remember being, what is that? It's Pulp Fiction. Okay. See that many years later, finally, breaks my brain, makes me want to really become a writer. I got Ezekiel 25:17 tattooed on my right forearm. So there's that. And then there is an episode of Tiny Toons where Jason Voorhees shows up. And I just remember being like, what the hell? Like, as a kid, like, what is happening? Because it's such a different tone than the rest of the show. Because it is a creepy. And I was like, what the hell? And then, like, years later, being at my cousin's house, and the Jason movies are marathoned on TV. And I was like, wait, that's what they were doing? That's amazing. And now I have a bloody Jason Voorhees mask tattooed on my right wrist. 2 things from 2 Looney Tunes, basically, properties, referencing things that would end up getting tattooed on me. So thank you, Tiny Toons, and thank you, Space Jam. You've made my mom very upset.
Every year since 1989, the Library of Congress has selected 25 films to add to the National Film Registry. The criteria? The films must be culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant.
Each week on You're Missing Out, we take a look at one of these films to try and get to the heart of why they were selected and why they still matter.
This week, our favorite music men return to the show. Jeremy Swanton and Kyle Reid Hass are here for 1932's Love Me Tonight.
Our guests today are TV and theater creators. Some of their credits include Contact High, the musical, an upcoming TV series, Act of Faith, and the Hass and Swanton YouTube channel, where you can see One Man Wicked. Returning to the show, the team of Hass and Swanton are here to join us to talk about Love Me Tonight. Guys, thank you so much for coming back.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.
Very grateful.
So happy to be here.
Back.
I've been waiting until you were on mic and we were recording to let you know that this is true. Out of the pantheon of people we had on season 1 and even the start of season 2, it took a good long while for Singin' in the Rain to get knocked out of the top 10 episodes. It held on so long. It is a fan favorite episode that you guys were on for last time.
We're very honored.
We're very honored. It's probably because I said a couple controversial things last time. So
yeah, you did.
Did he?
I think he implied that he wished that abuse was still okay in the arts because it made art better.
In fairness, Kyle, you minutes after I had talked about Arthur Freed being a known sex pest, forgot I said that and went, Arthur Freed is somebody I really look up to and admire, and had to go career-wise, not personally. Just want to clarify. So
yeah, he made some errors in his judgment in his personal life.
And thankfully, we're not going to be talking about anybody today who may have made errors in their personal life during, I don't know, the Second World War.
No. It's only recently that people have been found out to be bad in cinema. Cinema was started by saints. It was only until the sinners.
Yeah.
The sinners came when High Def showed up.
That's exactly.
History in general. Everyone was great. And now,
recently,
all of a sudden, we're lifting up the blanket and there's all these bed bugs of history.
Oh, wow, people died. Wow.
I just snorted. We're off to a great start.
I think this is good because last time you guys were on the show, you weren't back in New York either, right? I think
we're still not back.
Last time you had just left, and now
we're still fucking here.
Now we're Midwesterners.
Now we're in the Midwest. Yeah. I look so Midwest, don't I?
You guys have got facial hair going on now. It's
you guys look like you were born out of a puddle in Brooklyn.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that.
No, I think it's great. It is since the last time I saw you guys, you look exactly how you would costume people to show the passage of time. When it's these characters are coming back after 2 seasons off the air. How do you show that they've had personal growth and a journey? Which is all really good for us to point out on this audio medium. I think that's a really smart choice.
We'll leave that to the imagination of
true. It's like a radio drama. Their imagination will come up with these images that will exceed what an actual image of what we look like now could possibly convey.
I'm gonna say it. I'm putting out a call for fan art. Fans, just what do you think they look like? Just send it in.
Our parents don't know how to draw.
Even better. Even better.
It's funny, you guys may have forgotten this, but in fact, way back when you were on for Singin' in the Rain, well over a year ago, I had talked to you. I think Jeremy and I had spoken after the show or texted, and I had said, this might be fun. You guys had just come on for arguably the most famous movie musical of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And in season 1, which is Singin' in the Rain, we had 2 musicals in season 1. We had Singin' in the Rain and Wizard of Oz. And in fact, technically, Jeremy is a part of both episodes. Because he performed a full one-man Wizard of Oz for us, which was a trip and a half to receive the in-progress pictures of, especially because I had forgotten we talked about it, and just got a picture of Jeremy in a lion suit one day, and was just like, what is happening? But
I commit.
Yeah, he commits.
It's so rude of you to out me like that. How dare you?
But we you're on for the most famous movie musical, and this season, one of the movie musicals we have, Love Me Tonight, a Rouben Mamoulian directed, Rodgers and Hart composed, Maurice Chevalier musical that, and I'm not saying this to be disrespectful, but I think if you went to most people, even people who consider themselves cinephiles, and you said, name the greatest movie musicals, they're going down a long list before it gets to this, if at all, it's not a particularly well-known title today, and yet in 1990, in the second year of the registry, it was inducted. So I thought that would be super interesting to kind of have you guys come from having just done, well, just in the scheme of the show, just done one of the most famous movie musicals, and now get into, well, here is this important and influential film that is not, there's no Love Me Tonight section of the Great Movie Ride, you know? There's no
anything section of the Great Movie Ride anymore.
This is true.
It's available at the Wheaton Public Library, which is...
The Great Movie Ride?
No.
They moved it to Wheaton?
Well, I mean, I wish.
I wish too. That was my favorite ride. I'm still not over it. Thanks for bringing it up. I'm crying behind my glasses now.
It's gone?
The Great Movie Ride?
Gone.
Yes, they
replaced it with some like shitty Mickey Minnie thing.
That Mickey Minnie ride's pretty good though. I'll tell you.
Is it? I don't care.
Cool.
It's shitty in my book because it's not Mickey Ride. But no, I totally just derailed your point with my Great Movie Ride fandom. No.
To Mike's point, I literally never heard of this movie.
Yeah,
never heard of it. Like I haven't seen a lot of musicals, but that was the thing we talked about last time. But like I've heard of many musicals. I've heard of Singing in the Rain before we did it. You know, I've heard of some of. I literally had no idea what I was getting into with this movie.
Right.
We also had never heard of it.
Well, you asked me if I can't say his name. Can you say his name for me? Chevalier.
Maurice Chevalier.
Yeah, I assumed that you were gonna ask us to watch Gigi, but
that's a future season, and that's its own bag of worms for that song. In fact, we shouldn't tell Tom anything about Gigi, and we should just live record him watching that opening song and trying to process that everything going on with that, you know. But no, I mean, this is the thing that's so interesting about this to me, and we'll get into it. But I wanted to have you guys on for it. I'm so glad we were able to work this out. You know, I know you guys are busy as hell with all of the credits that we listed up top, and the presumably 5 other things that you guys have going on. Because I feel like every time we talk, you've got some new thing going on.
We're always happy to make time for you guys. We love you guys.
Oh, thank you.
And it truly is an honor when we get asked to come do stuff like this, because it doesn't really happen as often as you'd think. People don't ask Hass and Swanton to come do stuff very often.
Well, that's their goddamn problem, and it's our benefit. And I'm very glad we got the gay musical Young Bucks to come talk to us.
Yeah, that is our official subtitle.
I mean, it's Pride Month, you know, so we had to.
To clarify, by the way, gentlemen, the Young Bucks are a wrestling tag team. He wasn't just using 1930s slang at you.
Oh, okay. I thought it was slang. Definitely thought it was like.
What if?
just look up pictures of the Young Bucks, and you guys would be like, yeah, no, he's right.
Okay.
Anyway,
I thought it was like Young Bucks, like
you
know, like deer.
Maybe that's next season as a bonus. Is we get Kyle and Jeremy back out here, and they sit with Tom and watch an old 30s musical, and then watch an All Elite Wrestling pay-per-view, and we just get the comparison.
I'm down. I'm honestly down. But I know we're on a tangent and away from the agenda, but I still have to be a little bit more ADHD, because I guess that's what we're calling all of ADD now. And Jeremy, what's the scene in Angels in America when they're from the ghosts from the past, and they are trying to like communicate that he's gay, and there's like do you remember what the word is where they finally get that he's gay? Because they like he says queer, sodomite? And they don't sodomite. Yeah, they're like he's calling himself queer and they don't get it. He's calling himself gay and they don't get it. And then he leaves and they're like, oh, that young fellow was a sodomite.
You know, I didn't know the Yankees were playing tonight, but I did know the line. I am pretty proud of it.
And now I give it back to you. I know you got an agenda.
Listen, we all got the things we're good at. It's fine.
Yeah, young buck. He was a young buck. That was my point.
He was a young buck indeed.
I also hate, Tom, that now it is kind of all I can see. You know, Kyle is doing the Matt Jackson Young Bucks facial. Have you guys considered becoming a pro wrestling tag team?
Yeah.
Have you thought about it? Okay, good.
Of course.
All right, good.
I think all gay couples do. You know,
I can't wait to see the one-man show Jeremy puts on of the Hangman Adam Page story.
No, actually, take it back, guys. Macho Man Randy Savage musical. Get working on it. I want it to start.
Alright.
Well,
But you
okay.
have to use Rob Zombie
What
lyrics.
happened to our
Okay.
musical, Mike?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, right, about the
Have
Rock
you
the
been
Fire
working on
explosion.
the book? Because we've been working on the score.
Have you? Prove it right now. Prove
I
it right now.
actually could. I can't
Hold
because
on,
we're
come on.
using the audio of my laptop
Okay,
to do
well,
this. But I swear to God, I
maybe-
wrote it. I wrote a motif. I wrote a leitmotif.
You really did.
It was trippy.
All right, so let's get into this. We're going to talk about Love Me Tonight. But before we talk about what we thought about the film, let's hear what the registry had to say. Here's what the Library of Congress had to say about Love Me Tonight. According to director Rouben Mamoulian, Paramount executive Adolph Zukor hurried Love Me Tonight into production to keep two of his more expensive contract players, Maurice Chevalier and Jeanette MacDonald, from sitting idle. If Mamoulian rushed, it doesn't show in what historians consider one of the most original of 1930s musicals, Love Me Tonight. By pre-recording the entire score, Mamoulian, who was influenced by the work of Ernst Lubitsch and René Clair, combined sound and image with more fluidity than most early musicals achieved. Songs by Rodgers and Hart, including Isn't It Romantic and Mimi, and an effervescent script filled with risque innuendo, are brought to life by Chevalier's saucy charm and MacDonald's angelic voice and beauty. So that's what the National Film Registry had to say. Also, gentlemen, if you want me to go back and redo your intro to say that you guys also have saucy charm, just let me know. I'm sure we can edit that in, because what a description of a person.
Yeah,
That's a very
I
great
want that.
description.
Saucy charm. So was this, all three of you guys, was this your first exposure to Maurice Chevalier? Were you familiar with Maurice Chevalier before?
I guess he's the guy from Gigi.
I'd heard the name before, yeah, but I hadn't seen him in anything. No, so this was my first exposure, to him. I'd say, yeah.
This was my first exposure too. And because I didn't know anything about this, I just went in blind. I don't know why the name Maurice Chevalier popped into my head while watching him. I feel like this guy's named Maurice Chevalier, and then I looked it up. I was like, holy shit, I was right. So yeah, first time, but yeah, I don't know where I've heard the name before. It was just in this broken brain of mine somewhere.
He's one of those names from early Hollywood that I think well after his films lost. It's the same way a lot of us who were just adjacent to pop culture, the name Valentino still means something. Or even before you see the films like Charlie Chaplin or Alfred Hitchcock, these names that just kind of meant something. Now, Jeremy and Kyle, I hate to correct you, but I think you actually have heard Maurice Chevalier before, even if you don't know it.
All right, tell us all about it.
Do you happen to remember a song that goes, "Which pet's address is the finest in Paris? Which pets possess the longest pedigree? Naturally monte the Aristocats." That's right. Maurice Chevalier sang the opening theme to the Aristocats, and that's his last credit before he died.
Oh.
So yes. So you do know him. You've heard his voice presumably growing up, and maybe noticed that for some reason the rhyme is supposed to be "Which pet's address is the finest in Paris," and then "longest pedigree," but for some reason he pronounces the S in Paris, so it throws off the rhyme.
I have a note about him fucking up what could have been a great rhyme in my notes, because I take note. But also, isn't Aristocats Walt's last credit? Or am I tripping?
Jungle Book was the last film that he worked on, and Happiest Millionaire was the last film I think that came out while he was alive.
Okay, so I'm just off. Is it the first after he died? Is that what my brain is doing?
Maybe?
Okay.
Maybe when is Aristocats? Is that 68? So then maybe.
Does someone else want to Google it?
When are we gonna
lazy?
learn cats and movies are just not a thing?
Are you
Judy
trying
Garland.
to plug
no, Judy Garland's
that
movie,
we talk
remember?
about Cats the movie now? What?
No, Judy Garland's
movie.
She did the animated movie about cats.
Oh, Gay Paris.
Yeah.
Gay Paris, Happy Pride Month, yes.
Do a cat movie, everything goes to shit, I think is the moral.
That's not true of that darn cat or the cat from outer space, so I hope you reconsider your assessment.
All right, I'll reconsider.
Okay,
Maybe animated cat movie, yes, because Cats Don't Dance was not successful either, but...
No. No, what was I gonna say? There's a scene it's in the movie where he rhymes romance with France.
It's
That accent's doing a lot of heavy lifting with those rhymings.
Well, this is the thing that's fascinating about this film. When I went into it the first time, because I had watched this like a year ago, because I knew it was on the registry and I wanted to get to know it. And at the time, I kind of just assumed it was only in the registry because, well, you have to get a Maurice Chevalier in there, right? He was one of the biggest stars of the 30s. And then I started to dig into this film more and its history and its importance in, movie musical history and all of the innovations in it. And it's funny, I had mentioned to Tom, because I watched Love Me Tonight like a year ago,
Okay.
and then proceeded to watch a number of the other Chevalier films that came before it. Because they mention Ernst Lubitsch in the description. Lubitsch had made the previous Jeanette MacDonald, Maurice Chevalier films, The Smiling Lieutenant, 1 Hour with You, both of which were Best Picture nominees the previous year. So he had done a number of these movies already, and they were all kind of the same thing, which is he's playing different characters, and they have different plots. But really, you're there to watch Maurice Chevalier do his shtick in pre-code sex comedies that are varying degrees of raunchy. Like they're truly I said to Tom, I think this morning, like Chevalier's career existed to give Will Hayes a heart attack. They're all movies that you watch now and go like, I'm impressed. I think, what is it? Smiling Lieutenant has a full musical number called Jazz Up Your Lingerie.
Ooh.
Yeah. They're for 1930s, they're a little, one of the, what is it? 1 Hour with You is fun because the entire premise of that is Chevalier plays a doctor, I think, who is deeply in love with and faithful to his wife. But everybody assumes he's cheating on her because he's Maurice Chevalier and he just gives off that vibe. So there's a ton of gags in the movie where he's just like, well, no, I mean, of course, nothing's going on. I love my wife. And another guy just goes, all right, but come on. And that's the bit for the whole movie. It's kind of great.
That is awesome, actually. It's really funny.
So I watched a bunch of these Chevalier films, and then Tom watched Love Me Tonight and was like, there's some great gags in this. And I guess I had forgotten, having watched the previous Chevalier films, the Lubitsch films that are just kind of like, oh, we're just Chevalier doing gags. I had kind of forgotten just how clever and Looney Tunesy and very silly this movie is.
That's what I not going into this movie knowing nothing about it. I was like, this is just a straight up cartoon. It's there's like some straight up Looney Tunes gags in this movie, and I was like, why didn't anyone tell me about this? And Mike's gonna probably tell me, oh well, I told you a year ago after I watched it, and I'd be like, yeah, shut up, I was hungover.
I forgot.
It was, and even at the beginning of the movie, you don't even really get a sense of that because it feels like an old like neo-realistic Italian movie, or like I feel like they took this for the beginning of Beauty and the Beast.
Oh,
where
yeah.
she's walking through town.
Yeah, that's in our notes for sure. Actually, the director of the 2017 live action remake said he looked at this movie deliberately.
Oh yeah, I mean it just feels like so much in the DNA of Beauty and the Beast cartoon and the movie, the live action one, but like it had this feel of like an Italian like neorealist sort of movie where it's like, oh, everybody knows each other and hey, yeah, we're like, we're on, doesn't feel like we're on sets or anything, and he's just walking through town and talking to everybody, and then it becomes a fucking Looney Tunes farce, and I was just like, this is great. I would watch more of these things if I knew that this is what they were.
Well, what you just said is like, in general with musical theater and musical film, my whole thing, like I want to make it more accessible for people because I feel like there's just a cultural notion about the art form that it's like boring and stupid. And for my sister to do in her like middle school show, like she's Woodstock and Charlie Brown and at her middle school, and it's boring and bad. And I actually think that this art form is incredible, but the thing about the musical is that it's really hard to get right as an artist. So what you're left with is a lot of really bad musicals and a few really good ones in the grand scheme of things. It's, to talk about Rodgers and Hart is exciting historically because you have Hammerstein and Kern working together and Rodgers and Hart working together, and both teams are kind of figuring out what a musical even is. And then when Rodgers and Hammerstein come together, obviously it's magnetic and amazing for the time. I know a lot of people find their shows boring now, but if you look at it in context.
But, trust me, we're going to do Oklahoma in a future season, and I cannot wait for Tom's reaction to Oklahoma. It's going to be one of the greatest transitions from, all right, yeah, they're singing about cowboys, to holy shit, this is dark.
Oh yeah.
Right. And
Mike,
are you
gonna sing
their first
Oklahoma? Yes, you have to.
Honestly, listen, here's my take. Here's my hot take. Tom and I would make a decent Curly and Judd, is all I'm saying.
Yeah. Wait, we'll do it. We'll do a whole
Right?
video drama production here on your
We
show.
should absolutely. Will it be in the public domain by then? I don't know.
I feel like I'm at the bar again, and the girls around me are talking in Spanish, and I'm just like, yeah, sure. I know exactly what you guys are saying. You guys are totally not making fun of me right now.
Real quick, Tom, Oklahoma is a musical about a feud between cowboys and farmers, and it ends with a town conspiring to cover up a murder because nobody liked the guy who got stabbed.
So it's Heaven's Gate?
Kinda. It's kinda Heaven's Gate.
Okay, I mean, it can't be any worse than Heaven's Gate, so, that's a plus.
No, it's wild. It's nuts.
I mean, I guess I shouldn't shit-talk Michael Cimino in Pride Month now that it's just come out that she is trans. So I guess, sorry.
It's tough. In Cimino's private life, identified one way, public life, it's a whole complicated thing. The book just came out. I haven't read it yet. But in any event, we should talk a little bit up top, because I think that there are people listening who, if I can put you guys on the spot, Jeremy and Kyle, there are some people listening who probably know, the same way that they know the name Maurice Chevalier, even if they don't know the biography, probably know the name Rogers and Hammerstein.
Yeah.
But maybe don't realize that when we're saying Rogers and Hart, that is the same. Well, that it's obviously it's the pairing of Richard Rogers, right, and Bret the Hitman Hart.
Right.
And they've had very different careers after.
Best there ever is, best there ever will be. Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of wrestling talk on this Chevalier show. But no, if you guys wouldn't mind talking a bit about
you say listeners, one of the podcasters is actually saying, I didn't know any of that. So enlighten one of the morons on mic.
So it was really cool watching this movie because it's like before the real golden age of musicals like took off, and Oklahoma is like kind of like the golden age like start, I'd say,
like
or Showboat.
Yeah, like people say,
which were both
pretentious historians dispute Showboat or Oklahoma. It doesn't really matter. One gave rise to the other.
Right. No, and so Rogers wrote the music, and then Hammerstein did the lyrics and stuff like that. And so they were very iconic for like just being spearheaded. They spearheaded what the golden age of musicals was. They were taking on controversial material and trying to make it accessible to the public while people are dancing around in tights. So
well, I think they even if the material itself wasn't controversial, and I like the way that Sondheim words it when he talks about it. I guess he's dead. People tell I haven't accepted it.
Yes,
he's still alive. I like the way he words it when he talks about this topic. He says, the characters may have been naive, is how he words it, and the subject matter might not be accessible now. And he certainly, Sondheim, I think, piggyback. Well, I'll finish my first thought. But he was trained by Hammerstein, so he had a lot of respect for him. He'd talk about him a lot, and he says that although their characters may be naive, their subject matter might not be accessible to people now. What is so exciting about their work in context to the time period is they further the story with the music. They get you somewhere with the songs. They have characters. It's not just that there is a story and it may or may not be exciting, and there's songs and they may or may not be good. It's that you're actually finding the plot is furthered in an exciting way through the songs being sung, in the same way that a film score can further a scene and heighten the drama and raise the stakes. And that the art of lyric can do that as much as music. So when we look at these we call that the golden age of musical theater, both these teams, I guess it's Hammerstein and Kern are Showboat, right? Or is it Hammerstein and someone else?
Isn't Kern show? I think Kern's Showboat.
Yeah,
Showboat,
I think it's Hammerstein and Kern. They do that with Showboat. Showboat is very much a story furthered by its music. It's heavy subject matter. It's about like a woman who's white passing, and her half sister is white, and there's this whole and the central drama being around the circumstances of their like ethnic backgrounds changing how they're treated in society.
We'll be doing Showboat on a future season too.
I love
the
to
movie
announce
is in the registry.
I love Showboat, but and I don't remember what piece it is that Rodgers and Hart do that is credited as also really breaking ground in that area. But then I know when Rodgers and Hammerstein come together and do Oklahoma, then they're crapping out all these amazing musicals where it's exciting and intense and furthered by the fact that you've got characters singing, soliloquizing, and is that a word? I guess. Yeah.
I mean, well, something that was really important to them too was adding the dance and the ballet.
Yeah, furthering story with dance.
They saw a lot of people saw it as 3 separate mediums. Like you have your musical show, you have your drama.
That's the Cole Porter musical.
Your dance show, and so they were like, why can't we just do everything together? And so
and it wouldn't it be exciting if ballet can be telling an exciting, dramatic, high stakes story with cultural resonance, and an opera can be doing that, and song can be doing that, and plays can be doing that, then why can't the musical, which at the time was called the musical comedy, why can't the musical do that too, and why can't there be a musical drama? And that's where you get the birth of this incredible, and I would say severely misunderstood art form.
And it's interesting you said, because one thing I think, I mean, obviously when you talk about the importance of Rodgers and Hammerstein, now Tom, for the sake of example, like, one of the things that sometimes you would complain about with movie musicals, and like something I think you expressed with Top Hat to some degree, and other movie musicals we watched in college and other times, is that it feels like it kind of will stop and do a song and then pick up again, right? And that a character will start by going, I'm feeling this emotion, and then sing a song feeling that emotion, and then end and move on. But with Rodgers and Hammerstein, I mean,
mine isn't Mimi. Yes, it is. I'm going to sing a song about it.
But with Rodgers and Hammerstein, I mean, the perfect example, the thing I think is so good, and I'm pretty sure Tom still has my DVD of this movie because I wanted to get him to watch for so long. Is with it's cliche to say, but with Carousel, the soliloquy in Carousel is one of the perfect examples of. So for context, Tom, you've got this scene that begins with a criminal, right? Billy Bigelow. He's just a low rent criminal who finds out that his girlfriend is pregnant, and he starts thinking about, like, she's pregnant, and starts singing this very triumphant kind of song of the "My boy Bill, he'll be tall and as tough as a tree," and all that. Then realizes, what if it's a girl? And suddenly the song shifts, and he's very gentle and very, my little girl, pink and white, and then realizes, like, if I'm going to have a kid, I got to step up. I got to be a man. And it becomes triumphant. I got to do something before. And the beauty of a moment like that, is it's the antithesis of what you complain about with some musical numbers, is that, like, we get to watch somebody go through this emotional journey. You just saw West Side Story earlier this, last year. And that kind of feeling of when he's singing about, just meeting this girl named Maria and all that. Imagine that, but also that we get to watch it change and the emotions change. That's really, I think, too, like, what they bring to it. And while you don't see that a lot in this film with what Rodgers and Hart do, I do think that what it does do is that it does manage to use the film medium and editing to make these songs, I hate to put it this way, but to make these songs less boring. In terms of, like, it's telling a story.
And it definitely, I could see, like, the seeds of where they were going to go, like where, I mean, Rodgers was going to go,
But I think both of them, but especially Richard Rodgers.
Yeah. especially with the opening number of this movie.
Yeah, with it, it's funny that I read on Wikipedia. There was, I guess, an implication on Wikipedia. The reason this ended up in the registry was, isn't it romantic?
Yes.
Editing and different characters and that whole circle of life sequence. I made a joke. It was like the live action Lion King with like Simba's mane being in the giraffe shit. But that sequence, I guess, was the groundbreaking thing that qualified it for the registry. But I also feel like the opening number and the use of the city sounds, creating the orchestra of the city, I thought was also pretty groundbreaking. And you see its influence in a million things. That I wrote a list
in the Heights, especially.
In the Heights opens like that. I wrote down Trash in the Camp. Even it's that whole using sound, just everyday sounds to create music. And the opening of the film Hello Dolly, Music Man with Rock Island and the piano lesson. And not just what we were just talking about, and you took the words right out of my mouth using Soliloquy from Carousel. If you'd allowed me to keep running my mouth about this topic, I would have eventually talked about Soliloquy, which is one of my favorite moments still in a musical, because I cry every time I watch that scene or listen to it, because this man who is just like a jerk and a mess, the realization that he has, that he's going to have a child, completely changing him. And the music documents the change, the lyrics document the change. It's one of the most incredible scenes. And I always say, that's the moment that made musicals like Les Mis possible. Like that scene. And an entire medium came from Soliloquy, but also not just furthering the story with music, but like you said, using this medium of film and the medium of theater in different ways. There's other things that we can do to use music to tell a story in film and theater, and the experimentation there that you see in a lot of pieces in the 30s, leading to in the 40s, it's sort of being mastered by the same people, is really exciting to watch. You see what they're doing here in this movie with the sounds of the city becoming the song, and in Isn't It Romantic? And there was another moment that I thought they used music in a really interesting way. You see that, I don't know if it was Mimi, but you see that in other films, like Jeremy said, like Music Man, which was a stage show. The way that they use music creatively to further the story and to tell the story, whether or not they're furthering it, just the fact that the music comes in a creative way. I was like, I wonder if this movie inspired that. And Tom, what you said about Beauty and the Beast, I mean, I was like, I bet Howard Ashman loved this movie. I feel like Maurice Chevalier inspired Lumiere.
I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that he's Lumiere, and Ewan McGregor was definitely trying that in the live action one. Don't know if he was successful, but Bill Condon definitely he knew those guys who made the cartoon were looking at this one, and probably threw it at some of the cast to look at that. And listen, if an idiot like me who knows nothing about this kind of shit can connect those two dots, then I mean, the impact of this movie and all the deeper stuff you guys are talking about really has to be monumental. If someone as much of an amateur in this world can connect those dots, just right there alone, this earns it a place in the National Film Registry.
And a bit of context that I want us all to think about here. So the staging, we were talking about the editing of this film being really impressive, and the use of like the sounds of the city coming together to form the music. There's a lot of stuff about this and how it is as a movie musical that is so impressive. And we are impressed by it watching it now. And I think an important thing to remember is this movie's 1932. The jazz singer is only 5 years ago.
Yeah, we're still in the early days, and you could definitely, not to say it's a poorly made movie, but you could definitely tell this is an early days of the talkies movie where it's a little rougher around the edges than you'll see even 5 years later or whatever the fuck, and then by the time we get to what we covered, Singing in the Rain, we've got this shit really down pat.
Well, it's worth noting there's a real world singing in the rain moment in this movie that I
Yeah.
assume
Yeah.
some of you guys caught, which is that he misses his mic at one point.
2000%. Yeah.
In general,
funny
I felt like
too.
we were watching
I
the
felt
Dancing
like, yeah,
Cavalier.
that's what I want to say. Like set wise, even, you know what I mean? It looked like it was taken from
So-
someone.
Well,
So then Gene Kelly was definitely like, hey, so I remember watching Love Me Tonight, and that French guy, he missed his mark. I'm gonna take it to task for that.
There's a moment he's doing that number. I forget the title right now, or maybe I think I remember the title, and I don't want to say it. The point is, it's in 1932. He's doing this number, which I think is beautifully staged. Because part of what's worth noting too, to talk about musical history, Rouben Mamoulian was a stage director as well as a film director, and one of the famous landmark productions that he staged was Porgy, the play that would become Porgy and Bess, the famous Gershwin opera. And one of the things that Mamoulian did in that he brought to film was that he became fascinated by the footlights on the stage, and he would ramp up the footlights to cast these odd expressionistic shadows on the stage. And he brought that with him to this film. So when Chevalier's doing that number about, the guy, the miscreant who gets executed and all that, all those long, gorgeous fucking horror movie shadows behind him, that's Mamoulian's thing. But in that moment when he's doing that, it's one of the only songs that they recorded live on the set, or Chevalier's vocals live on the set. And at one point, he bends down, like he's getting his head chopped off in the scene, right? That he's pantomiming head chopped off. Bends forward and then turns his head away, and when he does, he's off mic.
Yep.
So you hear his sound come swinging back in as he turns around, which is such a great early cinema thing.
That was one of my favorite visual shots in the entire movie. I loved the shadows and the way that it looked. I thought it was so theatrical, and I thought it was just beautiful.
And the way they captured it with the camera moving back and in and out to get the shadow and get the close up. And
I love that you said
like
horror movie, because it definitely felt like a horror movie at times, like when they're looking you directly in the
weird
eyes,
can we talk about the weird sisters that like
yes, the Macbeth. Well, here's a crazy thing. It's funny. We'll talk about this right now because it's funny you mentioned horror movies. Let's talk a bit about Rouben Mamoulian, why he's in this. So Ernst Lubitsch had directed the previous Chevalier films, and look, we love Ernst Lubitsch. We did Ernst Lubitsch's Ninotchka earlier in the season, another film that romanticizes Paris. We love Lubitsch, but Lubitsch's Chevalier films were kind of on the rails. They were kind of just like, look, this is what's going to be. We're going to have a plot. It's going to be a lot of body shit, and mostly Maurice is going to sing to the camera, and we move on. Mamoulian gets brought in, and initially he wasn't sure he wanted to do it because he was exhausted from having just finished making a very similar film to this. Tom, what was Rouben Mamoulian's last film before this?
A little movie called Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
The most influential sound horror film that wasn't made by Universal. The Frederick March, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, first horror film to win any Oscars, won Frederick March the Oscar for lead actor. So Mamoulian had just finished essentially revolutionizing the horror film and then rolled into this. So when you see these expressionistic touches, like you guys were talking about the sisters, the Macbeth type sisters, that's him essentially going well, we went maximalist in this horror film. Can I take that same maximalism and put it in this other medium?
It reminded me of Ed Wood a little bit.
Yes.
With the Glenn or Glenda moment with the pull the strings, where it's like, this does not feel like the same movie.
But that's, the beauty of this film, I think, is that it kind of is just whatever it wants to be at any moment in a way that's fun.
I think that's one of the things that really caught my attention with this movie is that it's a musical. And it's getting this theatrical quality to it, which Rouben Mamoulian kind of understands that on the stage you already have this immediate sense of you have to suspend your disbelief in a gigantic way because obviously there's not even the screen to separate you. It's like, okay, I have to pretend that these guys are actually in France or whatever. So why don't we take that level of suspension of disbelief and bring it to the movies, because we can really go in on the insanity and how unreal everything is, and just add this. Like I said, it's like Looney Tunes, but you never lose like your connection to the story or anything.
No.
So you can have the Macbeth sisters, or the Shadows, or just like these.
Jumping in front of the train.
Yeah,
the train scene's so good.
Or
train
like Mike said, the bit with the painting that falls off the wall.
Oh yeah, we haven't gotten to that yet. My favorite gag in the movie.
Or my
pretty
favorite
great.
my,
Amazing.
or my favorite gag in the movie is with the horse, and it's like, no, that's not the bad
Solitude.
horse. This is the bad horse, and it's in a tiny little fucking barn, just completely chained together with like the chains you would like try to tie down a Greek god with, and it starts kicking the walls out and everything, and just like, this is ridiculous. But you know what? I love it because it's not real. It's not trying to be real. It's just trying to entertain you like a musical would. We know people don't burst out into song. I mean, obviously, I can't speak to you guys. I don't know what gay people do. So, what do I know?
Oh, we do. Gay people burst out into song, but I do.
Okay.
I will.
Okay, I fucking knew it, Mike. You owe me $20. You son of a bitch. He tried to lie to me this whole time. I've known him that you don't break out into songs, asshole.
I don't know what bisexual people do.
We hum. We just hum.
They tap their
we
toes.
complain.
We quietly hum to ourselves.
They just complain.
They complain. I was going to say that the whole when we talk about like suspension of disbelief in a musical, this conversation, bringing it back to this conversation we're having about Rodgers and Hammerstein, I do think there are. Maybe it's because I was brought up with musicals and my parents were big fans of the like 90s blockbuster musicals, the 80s, 90s blockbuster shows, like all the Cameron Mackintosh things like Les Mis and Phantom and all that. So I was a toddler when I was being brought up on all of that, and I never had to suspend my disbelief with a musical. But also I feel like in our culture, if you watch the Disney movies, and of the Disney Renaissance, then you've got that in your history as well, and that's influencing how you take these stories in. So I do think that contemporary audiences can enjoy a musical, and like they can a lot of times they don't, I've noticed, and not really be caught up on the fact that the characters are singing, but that's a lot of work went into getting audiences to accept that. And every time you write a musical, it's still a lot of work to get an audience to accept it. I think a lot of bad musicals of now are bad because musical theater writers aren't doing that anymore.
Suspension of disbelief horror. I feel like we're talking about the Dear Evan Hansen movie.
Yeah, that was a horror. You're right.
Well, I mean, honestly, it's kind of like it feels honestly like these days the pendulum swung back around to where people really can't suspend their disbelief with live action musicals anymore, and it's really, we can only buy it with cartoons. And other than like the big Hamilton explosion a few years back, it seems like we don't get we've had like a few good movie musicals last year after a dearth of just absolute nightmare fuel, like Cats and Dear Evan Hansen and just all sorts of just garbage. The fucking Hugh Jackman Les Miserables, where Russell Crowe is proving to the world that maybe singing was a mistake.
Right. And music in general. The crack when he dies. Well, some people like the crack, I guess. It's like a contested thing now.
It's just like, wow.
Yeah, I didn't know Les Mis needed body horror. But I will say, in response to what you're saying, Tom, I think that that's less to do with audiences and more to do with artists. I think that Lin, for example, is a really good musical theater writer, or can be when he desires to do so. And sometimes it's not what he's trying to do, but is be a good writer. But when he is, he's really good at it. I would say Hamilton did well because he understood these rules that are like these kind of age-old principles that work in a musical, and he figured out a way to make them contemporary and accessible for people. And I would not say that Pasek and Paul have been spending their time doing that. They know how to capitalize on a moment. Sorry, I'm throwing shade, whatever. I don't care. It's my genuine opinion. Like, I think they write really good music, but I think that these principles that were discovered bit by bit in this pre-Golden Age era of this movie that we're talking about. Once they were kind of established, and there was a whole decade where the musical was everything in pop culture for the 50s and 60s, some of the 60s.
Yeah.
I guess in the beginning of the 60s, it started to die. But the 50s, yeah. And at least for the 50s, the musical was everything. And I think that was because you had Rodgers and Hammerstein kind of quality controlling what the musical was and arguably monopolizing what the musical was. And I think you're right that you get these one-offs like Hamilton, and what was the other? You mentioned another one. Hamilton, you said, oh, well, I maybe you just made me think of it, but I thought Spielberg did a great job remaking West Side.
Well, I mean, Spielberg did a great job with West Side, but even on stage, I mean, before that was Book of Mormon was caught, people's attention. But also to kind of tie it back to Hamilton, and I'll make a point about West Side Story, is that Hamilton really, even more than a lot of musicals, I think, really heightened the whole suspension of disbelief thing by breaking history and saying, well, we're going to cast people of color in these roles that are historically white, which broke a lot of fucking, Facebook uncles' brains. But then you have like West Side Story, which, in my opinion, stone cold masterpiece, but because the constant like mediocrity to outright abomination of movie musicals for the years leading up to it, it didn't make any fucking money because at this point people just said, well, we're done with this shit. And it's just one of those things where I think like the pendulum has swung so far. This is a conversation me and Mike have all the time. Audiences with movies today are so now everything needs to be, oh, it's got to be realistic, or oh, it's got to reflect my lived in experiences. And musicals, even unless you force West Side Story onto people, they're just gonna be like, well, it's just, I don't know, I don't want to watch a musical, or it's just it's this thing where in 1932 people were like, hey, we get it, movies are fucking fake, just throw some crazy shit at us and entertain us. And now it's you got 1,000 channels on TV. You got 1,000 streaming services, movies coming out your ears. Everything now, everyone has to be. Well, this movie has to reflect reality now, and you just go, well, we're kind of losing the magic of some straight up nonsense like Love Me Tonight, which, not to denigrate it, great, I loved it, but it is ultimately just fun, entertainment. It doesn't have to be a fucking indictment on the Baltimore public school system.
I think it's also like, I think there's also an element too, though, with this of the musical as a genre. You used to be able to go to the theater. I hate to sound like back in the day, but the musical, the Western, the monster movie, like you went to the theater because you wanted to see a thing. Maurice Chevalier is of an era of star where like whatever you just went to see it because you wanted to see them do their thing, the same way like one of my things I've discovered over the last couple of years is I really enjoy watching Roy Rogers movies. They churned out like 30 movies of singing cowboy Roy Rogers. They were all like 60 minutes a pop. They were B movies. And you would just go to the theater and go like, I don't know, what do you got playing? Well, I want to go see a musical, or I want to go see a Western. And I do think that now one of the things that has happened is that the musical has kind of got, it's not just the general public doesn't go. I think there's also an element of the musical is dealing with something that I think the horror film genre deals with, which is there are passionate fans. There is the theater community as well as the horror community. And one of the things that Tom and I talk about all the time with horror, and I think happens with theater too, and I think happens with, anime too, or some of these other like niche genres, is that the fan base has now formed around a particular thing and hypes up a particular thing. And then when it reaches the public, yes, sometimes it becomes Hamilton, right? But sometimes the same way that like, Tom and I talk all the time, but like a horror movie will screen at some festival, get hyped to shit. Then we go see it and go, that was nothing. The same way, like, look, it's fun to clown on Cats or Dear Evan Hansen. But the weirder thing about those things is Cats was the longest running Broadway musical. Dear Evan Hansen won Tonys, and then the general public saw it and went, that's what this is? You said this was good. That's what this is?
You guys are saying so many interesting things. I'm going to talk too much. You're like
no, please.
No, it really, okay, so first of all, everything you said, Tom, extremely resonates with me as someone who worries about the future of this art form I love so much. And like extremely, you're actually kind of a musical theater guru, just so you know. You're in everything that is a problem with musical theater right now. And what you just said, Mike, I think is true to an extent about musical theater has its people around it. And it's a serious problem. But what was going to fall out of my mouth as you were talking was, well, the horror fan base is cool and the musical theater fan base sucks. But like to be completely honest, a lot of them are just mean, bratty people. But I think the reason why is the root issue of, I think, what has happened to the musical in America is when it became an educational tool in the schools. And it is so tied to theater education, like the drama teacher and the kinds of kids who end up in those programs. And their obsession with the art form is about being a star and being in the spotlight. And then they identify with it. They get validated. It's about validation. It's not about quality of the art. And then they go off to college thinking they're going to be the big star of their program. And it just becomes this huge mess. And then I think that Glee actually perfectly captured that with Rachel Berry. I call it the Rachel Berry problem when I'm talking about this thing. She epitomized the kinds of toxic people that now all of the art form is for them. And
I mean, worse, Karen Cartwright.
Yeah, Karen Cartwright is another great example from
show,
Smash.
And then she freaking leaves.
Yeah, and it's same thing. Rachel Berry does the same thing. She gets her dream role in the first revival of Funny Girl. Let's not go there with Beanie. And ground to cover now that you've played. But then she leaves as soon as she gets the role. But the problem is these people. Sorry to generalize. There's a lot of exceptions, and I've met a lot of wonderful people in the theater. They aren't interested in a good show. They're interested in a good role. They're interested in
Yes.
And to bring it full circle to what you're saying about having fun, Tom, like having a lot of vocal technique, for example, is a great party trick. It's like being like double jointed or burping the alphabet, but it doesn't really interest me on a deeper level if you can like hit a bunch of high notes using proper vocal technique. And it seems to be a lot of the people I meet in the musical theater world now, that's all they're here for. They're here for the party tricks of I've learned the craft. And where does that come from? Well, how did you become popular in your high school theater program? By being the best singer. So their whole obsession with this art form has nothing to do with the art form itself. But Tom really made me think about it as he's talking as someone who wants to appreciate musical theater, but is having a hard time with it, with a lot of these crap. Like you said, I always say most musicals are bad. And it's just because of the history of the art form so far. Like, you've got the pre-Golden Age musicals that were either forgotten or we remember some of the melodies. Cole Porter wrote some great songs. Berlin wrote some incredible stuff. But they don't really have a story in the same way. And then you've got, Rodgers and Hammerstein in their glory for a second. And like Sondheim says, a lot of their characters and the content of the story isn't accessible now. And you got a Daniel Fish like the Daniel Fish revival of Oklahoma, which subverted everything without subverting it, if we're being honest. And then you've got what Sondheim was doing, which is really cool. Most people like Sondheim. He was trained by Hammerstein, so he was just piggybacking off of that.
But can you hum him?
They say no. And Jerry Herman said in his Tony speech that was why he beat Sunny in the Park with...
Right, Lacage. Which Sondheim apparently took very well from what I read. It was definitely chill about it.
He didn't all write an entire song about it. No, but after that, you don't see people really trying to break ground with the medium until Jonathan Larson, who dies right away, Lynn, who did Hamilton, and that was that recent because musicals now, people don't want to invest money in it. It takes a decade to get a musical to Broadway. As a writer, you have to pretend like you've been writing it for a decade and like make insignificant tweaks to get investors to think, oh, it's still in development, and it's this stupid asinine game now. And you can't predict 10 years out what's going to resonate with audiences. Like you have one-offs like that shake up the art form, like Hair, you mentioned, Chorus Line in the 70s, in the 80s. What was it? Like, I guess
Canon.
Yeah, I guess Phantom, Les Mis, all the Cameron Mackintosh.
Shows,
Yeah,
you know?
and then you got in the '90s Rent, shaking it up, and then in the 2000s Spring Awakening, I'd say is the show that really shook it up, and then 2010's Book of Mormon, like you said.
I mean, wouldn't you also say, and this is totally off topic,
please.
wouldn't you also say that perhaps in a negative way, the thing that shakes up the 2000s is the producers?
Yeah.
And the fact that, like, the producers comes out, wins record Tonys, and suddenly everybody's going, what movies can we put songs on and put it on a stage?
Yeah.
And we get, you know, fucking Shrek the musical and shit. Like, I feel like that was a big thing that happened after the producers came out.
You're right. But I will say, in general, it's just that if you look at the history of the musical, there hasn't been... it's just been a bad luck for this art form and for people to really take a look at what makes it work. So people accidentally get these hits, and usually the people who write those one-off shows I mentioned, that's their only big show. Usually, I mean, like Hamlish did some movie. Hamlish just mostly was known for Chorus Line. Those guys who wrote Hair, I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but I've Googled it. They're just known for Hair.
Excuse me. Let's not denigrate the Two Gentlemen of Verona musical.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm
one of the early roles of Jeff Goldblum.
Right.
Look it up, folks. That won Best Musical at the Tonys. No one knows it existed.
It's crazy.
Well, I forgot Avenue Q and
year,
Wicked. Those were also shows that really shook up the art
shook
form in the 2000s, along with Spring Awakening. But yeah, it's just been a bad time for this art form that's just struggling for me, maybe I'm biased, but I love what it can do when it works really well. And it's more than just have a good time. It's transform people. And there's a reason why everyone's mom, when we were all kids, was obsessed with this art form, because they, something about the shows they were putting out at the time resonated with that demographic. But it really can change you, because it's all these things working together. It's in the same way that a great film score can make or break a movie. Now you've got the characters singing, you've got those songs furthering the story, you're using dance, which is like one of the most expressive and primal art forms there is. And not to mention, scenery, and really every art form all working together to transform people. And it just rarely do the stars align. But I do think there was one other thing I was going to say. Oh, something that is worth noting specifically for Love of Me Tonight, to bring it back to the topic, is that the musical started to get its footing in the 1910s and 1920s, I guess. And then when the Depression hit, no one wanted to live in New York. And also, it was really hard once Broadway got unionized to produce live theater, so they all moved to LA, and that's why you get all these musical films in the 30s. That's where the musical movie in Hollywood comes from.
Okay, after last episode, when Jeremy starts saying we should be able to abuse performers, and now Kyle's coming in talking about the unions in the 30s, how controversial are we getting today is all I'm wondering, Yeah,
I mean, Not to express a political opinion about it, because I wasn't alive then, but I do know that it made the art form a lot harder for producers, because it costs way more money.
Did you know that if you are doing an equity show and you're a producer, you have to buy the cast underwear?
You don't have to. They're allowed to require you to provide their underwear in an equity contract for a Broadway show.
Okay, but in fairness, if you're doing Angels in America, one of them's running around in his underwear for a while, his Magic Mormon underwear. So that kind of, that levels out.
But that's the union now, which is toxic. I'll just say it. It's toxic. The Actors Equity Association is toxic. But I don't think it's that controversial. I think everyone has a problem with them. But
no, I just like the fact that every time we get you on mic, the two of you are just like, I'm gonna cut loose. This is the Joe Rogan experience of musical theater here.
LOL. Well, I mean, I don't see the point in hiding these thoughts. I feel like a lot of people have them. They're just too afraid to. They want someone else to be the first person to express a lot of these thoughts about things that are obvious problems that are hurting people, and everyone just kind of goes, well, I don't know if that's an opinion I'm allowed to have yet. Oh, next year? We're going to have that opinion next year? Okay. But meanwhile, it just screws people over.
So in terms of controversies, I guess we should talk about this now.
Okay.
Let's talk about why we don't know Maurice Chevalier as well as we should. So Maurice Chevalier is one of the big stars of this period, of the early 30s, right? Massive star. One of those names that we all know, but what happened to his career? Well, okay. So in the late 30s, early 40s, something happened in Europe. Anybody have a guess what that was?
I don't know.
I don't know if this is
40s Europe. Oh, I don't know.
So these fellas from Germany invaded France.
Are you kidding?
Right.
What?
Now, Maurice Chevalier was obviously living in France at the time, and there was a lot of controversy around Chevalier's activities. Now, it's interesting. What is interesting about this is that the whole Chevalier saga is actually a lot more complicated, and I am not going to be able to put it all into, I'm not going to do it justice right now, but I'm going to try my best. Chevalier, for a long time, was labeled as a French collaborator, right? Which we got to remember, what was going on in France at the time. The new government of France, the Vichy government, was collaborating with the Nazis who had invaded France. And then, of course, you had the resistance going on. And after the collapse, after World War II had ended, there were all these lists coming out of all these alleged French collaborators. Now, obviously, the people within the Vichy government were absolutely Nazi collaborators, and in some cases, Nazi sympathizers. Chevalier showed up on some of these lists. Now, Chevalier publicly, during the war and during the occupation, had famously stayed, quote-unquote, apolitical, where he was just going like, I just want everyone to get along. I am a lover. I want to, Pepe Le Pew, his whole thing. But he was identified on some of these lists as a French collaborator, and some information came out that at a certain point he had performed for some of the collaborator dignitaries in France. He had performed some shows. Now, I think a trial had happened, and it was determined he was cleared. But even though he was acquitted by a French-convened court, the English-speaking press was hostile to him. There were many years that he was refused a visa, and in The Sorrow and the Pity, the famous documentary, he is, footage of him is shown alluding to the fact that he was a collaborator, but also that he, claimed he wasn't, and this whole thing went back and forth. So his career kind of took a hit because it was believed that he was, a French collaborator, a Nazi collaborator. He got some work on and off in some less, noteworthy films like a Pepe or a Jessica. And then, in the 60s, he gets picked up to do some Disney films, like In Search of the Castaways and The Aristocats, because quite frankly, Disney less uptight about what you may have done during World War II, as we know, because Werner von Braun shows up a lot. Point is, you could go on Disney Plus right now, watch Man in Space, and hear from Werner von Braun.
Yeah, was gonna say, probably not the best thing for Walt's reputation is not liking the Jews by hiring some Nazis.
So we'll get it, but here's the interesting thing about Chevalier, and the reason I bring this up at all. Turns out a lot more has come out, and of course things are debated, but the reason that, even though Chevalier was in the free zone of France, he was not in the Nazi version, he continued to perform. Chevalier's wife and her family were Jewish, and that was not well known publicly.
Right.
And Chevalier, during any times that the topic of the French occupation came up, was claiming neutrality and I want us to all just get along, in order to keep as low a profile as he could, knowing that the Nazi regime would target his wife and his wife's family. In addition to that, it came out that the reported performance that he gave for the regime, for the Vichy regime, he agreed to do in exchange for the release of 10 prisoners who were part of the resistance.
Okay, so I thought it was like a Claude Rains in Casablanca, but he's actually a Victor Laszlo. Is that what we're saying?
Kind of. It's very so he's that's the thing that makes it fascinating is that essentially once he got the collaborator label, he couldn't shake it, right?
Right.
He basically spent the rest of his career kind of with a bunch of people who either went, I think he worked with the Nazis, or I don't really care that he worked with the Nazis. It was a while ago. And it looks like there's a lot more nuance to his situation. But when we talk about Chevalier and why he is not as well, and why, let's face it, for all of us, our first exposure to a Maurice Chevalier type is Pepe Le Pew, is like the parody. You know, why that is in part because I think that this reputation hit him. And then don't forget, all of these movies, which we're going to talk about in a second, but all of these Chevalier movies are risque. They are all sex comedies. That was his thing. His gimmick was, I'm a horny French guy, and I'm going to do stuff with women. Like, that was his get. And sometimes vaguely implied men. These movies were wild. Point is, these movies were suppressed by the Hays Code. They were censored down. In fact, the version of Love Me Tonight that all of us watched is not the version that originally played. When it was released, there were multiple scenes, including whole verses of songs that were cut out by the censors before a re-release in 1945, and that's all we have. So consider the fact that for the late 30s, early 40s, because the Hays Code comes into place in 34, 30s and 40s, we're not seeing Chevalier films because they're dirty. And then after that, we're not really seeing Chevalier films because he's allegedly a collaborator. And then they've kind of been lost. You know, we talked about this earlier this season with Harold Lloyd, who they call the third genius of silent film. And the reason that we don't know Harold Lloyd the way that we know Chaplin and Keaton is not because one is better than the other or anything like that, so much as Harold Lloyd didn't let his films get screened as frequent. There is something to be said about the fact that, you know, this film, when you watch it, you know, Tom talked about like not knowing how funny it was and how absurd it was. This film just did not get to have the legs that A Singin' in the Rain has, or some of the other films that we know as classics, or even classics from the 30s, didn't have the legs that some of these films do. Even the Astaire Rogers musicals that we see, like, those were allowed to play, you know? If Fred Astaire had been accused of being a communist or something, you know, we may not have seen them the way that we do. So that's an element to this as well.
Interesting. That is interesting. I mean, this movie definitely has some boring parts, and it's got some like you said, early talkies parts. But I do agree. I think that something else had to have been going on because it's pretty great, and to be in the registry and be pretty great, and for me to not have heard about it till you asked us to do this.
I wonder if nationalism after the war played a part of it too. You know what I mean? Having like Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire versus Chevalier. You know what I mean? Like if you're having like, you know, American dancers and performers, you know, like,
that's really interesting.
You know, why take the risk? You know.
I mean, especially because you can't get around. I mean, you know, you can't get around that accent.
Right.
He certainly never dropped it, and it's the same way like another film we did, Ninotchka. I mean, Greta Garbo only makes like one film in 1942 and then retires. You know, I do want to talk about the censorship of this too, just because listening to the commentary is. I want to note on the Blu-ray. The Kino Lorber Blu-ray. The commentary is by Miles Kruger, the founder and president of the Institute of the American Musical. I want to single that out because Miles Kruger does one of my favorite things on any kind of commentary, which is somebody who doesn't think the audience knows what a commentary is. You know those commentary tracks where the first 5 minutes is somebody going, so what I'm going to do is while the film's going on, you're going to hear me talk about some behind-the-scenes facts and other things. And you're like, oh boy. Apparently he was friends with Rouben Mamoulian, so he knows a lot of stuff. But he does get lyrics to a song that had its verses cut that did have my eyes open a little bit. So you remember the scene where the doctor goes to Jeanette MacDonald's character? We've barely talked about the plot of this film. We'll fit some more of that in. But when the doctor goes to Jeanette MacDonald in her bedroom, right? And you have that little bit of bawdiness where he says, you know, undress. Well, I'll only look at you with the doctor's eye. Well, the doctor's eye is satisfied. That whole shtick, right?
Yeah.
And then he says something, something's wrong with her. What's wrong? Well, she shows the picture of her husband, this elderly man. And she hasn't been married in years, right? And then they do the gag they do in the movie. The actual gag is him walking out, and they go, "What does she need?" And he goes, "Well, she needs to be married." Well, we can't get her married. What else can we do? Exercise. And it's a little bit of a double entendre, right? That's what we got to keep. What was cut are a song that he sings about. A song is called "A Woman Needs Something Like That." And again, there's some subtlety here, guys. Now, Tom, you've mentioned not being well versed in musicals, so I apologize. This may, you may not be able to pick up on the subtle things going on in these lyrics, but we'll all try as we might. The lyrics were, "Let me tell you this, dear. Let me tell you this, my dear. A doorbell needs tinkling, a flower needs sprinkling, and a woman needs something like that. A car needs ignition to keep in condition, and a woman needs something like that. All inventions of Edison and medicine would leave me flat." Wait for it. "A peach must be eaten, a drum must be beaten, and a woman needs something like that."
So they're saying she needs Jesus.
That's I can't figure out what that means. It's really obtuse. Any thoughts, Tom? Any theories on what that song was about?
I think that's the exact pitch they give to every woman they try to convince to be one of Tom Cruise's wives. This was early Scientology. I'm sorry.
But yes, so those were the lyrics there, in case anyone needs a hint of what those early Chevalier films really were all about back then. There was so much. Myrna Loy's character had a lot to do in the original cut of the film, where there's a whole gag about her, because there's Charlie Ruggles is in the film, obviously is the rustabout. There's a whole subplot in the original cut of the film with Myrna Loy and Charlie Ruggles.
Okay.
Because Myrna Loy, she's conveyed in the film, even in this version, as, I guess they would have called it at the time, a loose woman or whatever. But there's a whole running gag in the film about her offering to take the other men in the house to the Virgin Spring, and him saying, "Well, no, the Virgin Spring, the next town over, the Virgin Spring. I didn't know they had any there." Like that, like little. And there's so many great moments. The one thing I discovered in the commentary that I did enjoy immensely. So there's a bit where they're at this grand ball, and it's Myrna Loy and Charlie Ruggles, and then the other old man. And the other guy's in the suit of armor, right? Yeah. And they're doing a bit about, she's spying through the door to see somebody undressing and all that. The guy in the knight's costume, the visor falls, right? And they just kind of play with it, and it keeps falling. That wasn't supposed to happen. That was just an accident on set, and Mamoulian kept the camera rolling. So if you go back and watch that scene, you see Myrna Loy actually just break on set. Like, she puts the fan in front of her face and is just laughing. And Charlie Ruggles is trying to hold it together.
Amazing.
Can I ask you at one point, like, did he break? Did someone break? Like, was that on purpose?
I think you did. That? Yeah, I think Jeremy. This is Jeremy's superpower. I think he noticed all of this.
But Kyle gaslit me, so
I didn't gaslight you in that instance. It was probably other instances throughout the film.
This is being married.
Yeah, welcome. Constant gaslighting, gatekeeping, all sorts of it.
Oh, you're busting out all the buzzwords today. This is great.
Yeah.
Oh, no, like
Jeremy's cousin taught us there's a triangle of gatekeep, gaslight, and girl boss, and everyone sits somewhere on the triangle. Where's your dot on the triangle?
Girl boss.
We should note, by the way, what part of this film too, for people watching it. A lot of this is a later Chevalier musical, so there are things playing on the iconography. One of my favorite bits that maybe is lost on modern audiences. He was known for his slouched posture and like straw flat hat, which I forgot to wear mine. I should have worn mine. But he's straw flat hat. So when they were doing the pan of the sounds of the city and the camera pans in and it shows that like the wall with the cracks in it that sort of form his posture and his hat hanging on it as like the intro of him is really good.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite gags, besides the picture falling down, Chevalier is known for his hat. It's his trademark, right? It's his Indiana Jones thing. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if that was an influence there. When the hat gets run over and the guy comes out and starts laughing that Chevalier's hat is ruined, So Chevalier just goes into the car and takes out a second hat. Just great stuff. Like, it's not, has no bearing on the plot. And
No.
yes, you could sit back and poke holes and go like, well, why did he think that? But it's just a great bit. And I think that kind of sums up the film and why the film does work, is that one of the things that Mamoulian's very good at, and I think that we lose, we were talking about the difference between film and theater and the problems going on in theater. And I think part of it is that now theatricality is a bad word.
Mhm.
And I think that
Mhm.
this film really understands that, one of the things I think about is that a certain thing that happens in some musicals, whether it's stage musicals or film musicals, is every once in a while you get something. The examples I'm thinking of are in, like, on the stage, Comedy Tonight in Funny Thing Happened Away to the Forum, Magic to Do in Pippin, or even on film, very recently, the opening number of Annette. So May We Start, where the Sparks Brothers and Adam Driver and all of them just start singing about, like, can we start performing? Which is, there are certain musicals that their first number is essentially just telling you, we're gonna do a show. It's like or the Muppet Show. Every Muppet Show opens with, it's time to play the music and light the lights.
Right.
And it's like telling the audience, hey man, just let us do our thing. We've got magic to do. We're gonna put on a show. And trying to get, nowadays, the audience into the mindset that people went into this kind of movie already having, which is, I am going to watch you put on a show. I'm going to feel directed. And the only genre that I think gets to do that now in film, horror to some degree too, but I think that the one thing you have is that action movies now, now action film Twitter can get up its own ass about things. But there is this thing of, like, when you would go see a Sly Stallone movie or an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie, when they're at their peak, nobody's fucking going to see Cliffhanger because they're invested in whatever the lead character's name is in Cliffhanger. I don't remember. You're going because, okay, Stallone is climbing rocks. I'll fucking go see that, like. And I think that
was me. Sorry, Kyle.
No, that's.
I moaned because you're making me feel like
came.
I have to pee, but it's not that I have to pee. It's that, like, I'm bursting with, like, affirmation for everything you're saying.
To be clear, I'm, like, doing, like, multiple things at once while y'all are talking. So if you see me randomly, like, you'll never know.
Yeah,
you'll never know if I'm reacting at you or anybody. So.
Oh, okay. It wasn't about me. Okay.
But Tom, you know what I'm saying in terms of, like, that there is this, when you talk about suspension of disbelief, it's not even just suspension of disbelief. It's being able to kind of go, like, okay, I'm going into this willing to accept what this is going to bring and knowing I'm going to get a specific good time.
Well, it's the difference. You're not going to judge, the new Cronenberg movie the same way you are going to judge Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. They're two different things going for two different.
You shouldn't, but a lot of people will.
That's ultimately the problem, is that everything is now judged on the same level, and it's not to say, like, things can't be art. Like, obviously, there could be art in this industry, and in the musical theater industry, the movie industry, and all that. But it feels like everybody forgets. And I talk about this with Mike all the time. I say this on the show all the time. It feels like everybody forgets this medium was started to entertain people.
Right. Okay. Yes.
Like, and so, like,
Can I bring up Malignant real quick?
Yeah, Malignant. Perfect example.
I want to hear you talk about it as a horror lover, because I fucking love that movie.
Malignant is easily the best horror movie last year because because that's a movie that right from the jump, like Mike's saying, from the very beginning, it's telling you exactly what it is. We are a heightened, over-the-top nonsense movie where just the way they're delivering the dialogue, now we're going to cut the tumor out, cut the title. And then, then immediately you get the main character getting her head slammed into a wall and her husband gets fucking slaughtered. And just and this is only like 10 minutes. And then she's like, well, when I was 8, I was adopted. And then you just have the fucking super dramatic orchestral Where Is My Mind music playing. And you're like, yes, give me this fucking nonsense. And you think, like, every 20 minutes, the movie you think you're watching, it becomes another movie. And then by the end of it, you're just like, what the fuck is this movie, and it all amounts to nothing. It means nothing. James Wan has nothing to say about the human condition with this movie. He just wanted to make a movie where a little man is sticking out of a woman's head and going, nah! They just shove it into her skull. And again, one of the craziest lines of dialogue last year is the sister going, Gabriel was eating your babies! He was feeding off of your babies! And you're like, what the fuck is... Oh my god, I love this shit! Leave it to a fucking New Zealand... I don't know exactly what Asian descent he is, but an Asian man from New Zealand perfectly just captured what it's like to watch an Italian horror movie. What the fuck? What the fuck? What the fuck for 2 hours, and then just going, yes, thank you. Yes. I don't need to see what this A24 movie coming out, Bodies, 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 where they keep saying, oh, you're gaslighting me, you're doing this, you're doing that, we're trying to have a message. No. I am a part of the Gabriel Hive, where I just want to see a fucking woman twist her body backwards, throw on a fucking leather coat, push her hair back like she's at a fucking goth show in the early 2000s, and just slaughter a prison filled with prisoners from every decade of the American Union. You got
Tom,
Jackie Brown. I'm sorry. He said malignant, and I had to go off.
I just wanted to say, Tom, on behalf of the rest of us here, I want to say during this month, I'm very proud of you for coming out as a proud member of the Gabriel community. I think that's really important.
Hey, listen, the Gabriel Hive. Hey, listen, if Netflix could accidentally turn the Babadook into a gay icon, let's get Gabriel into the LGBTQ. Just waving that flag as he's just twisting himself backwards and just like...
Yeah. Actions in which that flag would wave.
I won't blow Gabriel, with
Gabriel really close with his sister, very jealous and threatened when she finds a man. Yeah, I ride with it. I'm with it. I'll take it.
But I was going to say, the reason why I brought up Malignant is I wanted to hear your rant, and I figured you'd be a fan. I genuinely did it, just like I wish I had made popcorn in advance, but I also wanted to talk about it because it's exactly what Mike is saying in reference to musical theater. And it's what you're saying, Tom, about people are forgetting like the comment that theatricality is a bad thing. What you're saying, this art form is to entertain. And what you said about like Juan isn't saying anything about the human condition. I mean, he is, like our dual natures and the fact that we harbor these personalities, all that shit. But he's saying it the way that you should in this art form, which is it's a fun way to say it. It's a playful way to say it. Yeah. You don't have to read into it. In the same way, I argue what you're saying. When I look in musical theater, and it's also a horror musical, I look at Rocky Horror, and it's just a really good time. I would argue that Rocky Horror is saying something really profound. I always say to have Richard O'Brien saying, let's make this transvestite queer person a movie monster, and go, oh, how scary, they're LGBT. It's an artful way to say something meaningful, but it doesn't have to be the point. If you want to just say something meaningful, you can go write essays.
Well, it's didactism is what's kind of killing at all kinds of storytelling. We see it with I make the jokes about like the A24 model is basically make your whole movie the first act of a normal horror movie, and then your last 10 minutes is telling you what you're supposed to get from this. Or even just, most of the time, the whole movie is just like, well, did you know about the patriarchy, blah, blah, blah. And, this is the thing, I don't know if you guys watched The Last Drive-In with Joe Bob, but, like, I watched an episode yesterday where he goes, if you just have a message, your movie's bad. You need to have a good story. Yeah. And even if your message is stupid, like, he even makes the joke, what's the message of Wizard of Oz? Oh, you don't have to, you could stay in your little shitty home in Oklahoma, in whatever, to have a good life. It's like, that's a bad message, but you know what? The story's great. Like, we've gotten so caught up in having to say the message and not entertaining you, because a lot of the best movies have messages. They're just not telling you the message. They're not screaming it in your face.
And a great film, the message is the story. So you can't differentiate the story from the message, because so I remember hearing the Smithsonian put out a video, I think it was the Smithsonian, and I think it was Patrick Stewart doing the narration, but neither of those details are important. They just give us some context. But the point was that it talked about how all these primal needs evolved into different art forms, like how food became cuisine and shelter became interior and exterior decorating and design, and like clothing became fashion. And story did this too. and it comes out of a need to communicate important ideas. I mean, it's what we try to do when we educate people, and time and time again, by and large, if you look at history, storytelling is one of the most effective ways to communicate an idea, to manipulate people. You've got propaganda film, it is an extremely effective way to control, to enlighten, to lift people's spirits, but also to convict people, to transform people. Because you go on something about how our limited empathy works. You go on a journey with a character, and the thing is, when you study, so I studied screenwriting before I did, not in school. I taught myself stuff, but I read books on screenwriting before musical theater because I had insecurities about writing music at first. And there are rules that you can study for how to more effectively essentially manipulate your audience. And that's all it is. It's for an audience, it's I want to be stimulated. And for an artist, it's okay, then I will manipulate you and you'll enjoy it. And that's really all it is with film and with storytelling. And the more effectively you can keep people's attention and not bore them, the more effective you're going to be in whatever your aim is. Now, if you're, to quote Sunset Boulevard, one of the message kids, and you have a message, that's fine. I actually think it matters. As an artist, I really am passionate about the message and the theme and what I'm trying to say with my art. Because when pieces have had that, and it's really, Carousel is a really great example. What Carousel is getting at is so important to me. What Les Mis is getting at, and I agree with you, I don't love Hooper's film, but what the stage show is getting at transformed my life and shaped who I am as a person. There's a lot of, for me, musical theater does that. A lot of musicals do that for me. And they're all, I would say, in that small category of musicals that don't suck. But they, in my opinion, but they all, the message aside, you don't even have to have a message to tell a good story. You just have, like you said, I guess maybe you do have to have one, but it doesn't have to matter so much as long as how you, in the telling, you do your job.
The way I always put it is that the perfect movie or musical or whatever, the perfect story is a perfect balance between entertainment and messaging. But if you're going to lean in one direction, I feel like it's always better to lean more towards the entertainment side, because once you start leaning towards the messaging side, again, you're just getting a TED Talk. You're just getting a fucking a chapter in a textbook or a lecture at school. You don't, I think the perfect example for, like, in my field, the horror field, I'm wearing a fucking Suspiria shirt and I got tattoos with skulls getting electrocuted to death. Do you look at the original Black Christmas and then you look at the remake from 3 years ago? The original this remake is just, it's not even a movie. It's just a Twitter thread of like some, girl boss feminist telling you about how bad the patriarchy is and all of this and blah, 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 blah. And you're like, great. Your movie fucking sucks. It's not scary. It's not entertaining. You're just ranting at me like I don't know, whatever. But you go back to that original Black Christmas. It's doing all the things this remake is trying to do about how women aren't treated right, how the patriarchy looks down upon them and kind of puts them in these positions because they don't believe them and they leave them vulnerable and all this shit. But it's not fucking saying that. It's not ending the movie telling you that. The whole movie's not about that. It's just a part of the text that you're enjoying or dreading this movie. It's fucking you up. It's making you feel like shit because you're like, God, this is so effective. And then when you start thinking about it, it's lingering in your head because there's a message. There's something there that's beyond the entertainment. And we're now getting to the point where it's almost condescending, to the point of, well, we just assume our audiences are so fucking stupid. We have to tell them the message and we're not even going to entertain them. And it fucking sucks. And, it's just not great. It's not a great place for storytelling.
And to Mike's point about setting up a show with an opening number or a musical film, well, that it leads into this, and I can say it in a couple of sentences. I know I talk a lot, but this bigger conversation about the problem with I think musical film is that directors overthink how to do a musical movie. Honestly, I think is the problem. Like I hear all these conversations like that, like Tom Hooper, who I think is just the worst. We all do as a musical theater director. Like it goes without saying. But I hear a lot of conversations about like, well, we talked about when can a character address the camera and when do we do a wide shot and you know we're gonna do our Les Mis movie where it's live singing and it's close-ups and we're gonna try to hide the fact that it's a musical as much as we possibly can. And it's like people are embarrassed of musical theater, like they're trying to like hide the fact that these movies are musicals. And I think
and then it also ostracizes the fans who loved it,
who do
too,
love
you know
it.
what
Yeah,
I mean?
that's a really
So
good
it's
point.
like,
so then it's like, what's the point? And then in order to
they're
get people
shitting
to
on
buy
everyone.
tickets, you think you have to cast people who aren't good at the art form, so it's a non-starter. And then, but what you said, Mike, is what I wish I see more in musical movies, where it's just like, we're a musical film, and a big bold exclamation point right at the opening number. And the movies that do that, like Little Shop, directed by Frank Oz, I think is one of the greatest musical films ever made. And it's so good for a million reasons. The director's cut, I'm not a big fan of the theatrical ending, but the reason why they had to change it, test audiences were like sobbing when the heroes died, because they were so invested in it because of what a great job they did with that movie. And it's because it's one of the few good musical movies, in my opinion, like really good musical movies out there that isn't one of the ones they'll talk about in a college program, because it really nailed being a movie and adapting the subject matter, which was all Howard Ashman, to come full circle. He wrote the screenplay for the film adaptation. But what you don't see is enough of, have them address the camera. It's a musical, and musicals are written for an audience to like address the audience. Like, I do think that Tim Burton did a really good job with Sweeney Todd. You know, like there like I know people have their opinions about that movie. I don't like what he did with Joanna as a character, but and it's funny, those are both horror, I guess, or riffs on the horror genre musical movies.
Yeah.
But it's this bigger conversation about audiences don't know, like we're blaming audiences, but I blame the artists actually, and the studios and the producers, because you can spend all your time capitalizing on what audiences like will give you, like they'll give you their money. Like that's what happened with Dear Evan Hansen. Like they, like that year, Hamilton was the year before, so audiences were like musicals, and people flocked to the theater, and the next big show that they wanted to like put on their shoulders and parade through the streets was Dear Evan Hansen.
Like ads in New York were like, it's the biggest thing since Hamilton. And
right.
Like, Hamilton was last year.
Hamilton was last but it wasn't a good show. Talk about gaslighting. I got gaslit by everyone my age in the musical theater world who told me I was way off, that Dear Evan Hansen wasn't good.
And now
everyone agrees it isn't good. And everyone's like, I've seen the error of my ways. I'm like, about time. But it's because it was so like topical, you know, and in a way that was all buzzwordy and make people feel like they are bad people if they don't like this. And then the music was written to like be an earworm if you listen to the album in your car or when you're driving around. But like musicals should be written for when you're seeing them. And if the music's good, you'll listen to it in your car. Like you said, I always say about musical theater writing, and we didn't do this with Contact High, it's a lesson we learned the hard way, but I always say you should write a show to whatever audience. So if you want to have a Broadway show, think about who's going to be in the audience. I think about the tourist who, or the guy who's like on a business trip and he made it a family vacation. He's got his wife and kids with him, and he's thinking about work, and he's stressed about like the work meeting he just came from, and the last thing he wants to do is sit through a musical. Or I think about like some Ken and Stanley, our friends who are in their 70s, who really miss what musical theater used to be, and they're just devastated watching this art form fall apart for them on the Broadway stage. Or I think about like the young people who just moved to New York who want to be in the art form and they're feeling discouraged and shit. So I propose all these different kinds of people, and it's like, who makes up, and I try to look into it and research it, who makes up a Broadway audience. And I look at our culture. Where are people at right now? Where's the zeitgeist? And then I write the show. I write the first page of the show directly to, it's like a love letter to those people, or a I'm going to convict you letter, or a like this last show I just wrote. It was I said to Jeremy, like, a stand-up routine essentially is how I approached it. I was like, okay, so it's going to be a stand-up routine where I alienate everyone with the characters' words, because we're living in a time now where people, I was like, I don't know how I can write to people authentically anymore, because there's so much pressure on artists to like say the right thing or be ethical or whatever. So I was like, I'm just going to get canceled with the first page and just write something that will alienate everybody. Like do the Seth MacFarlane, like South Park type thing, where it's just like really offensive, really funny, but really, really offensive jokes, piss everyone off, and then go from there. Because I was thinking about the moment we're living in right now. And I knew if I have a chance at reaching people, I would have to do something like that. I felt I would anyway, that in my opinion, that I'd have to do something like that to get people.
Well, and it's interesting you're saying that, because I was thinking about with this film, Love Me Tonight, which we were ostensibly here to talk about. But no, it's great. This is always from day one what I wanted this show to be, is like, we've got a movie we're supposed to talk about. Let's see where the fuck it goes. But one thing that's interesting about this is when you're talking about how the musicals are written, this, what Rouben Mamoulian did with this is a push in that direction in a big way, in terms of, prior to this, a movie musical was something where they went, all right, we're going to go to our Tin Pan Alley songwriters and we're going to say, hey, give me 5 songs and then we're going to stitch a movie around it. Or here's the script. Here's the points where somebody's supposed to sing a song, right? Mm-hmm. And what Mamoulian decided to do was he canned the screenwriter, he canned the composers, brought in Rodgers and Hart, found a play to adapt for this story, loosely adapt for the story, and then went to them and said, you're going to write the music and you're going to write the score, which apparently Rodgers thought was very wild for the time, to have, him write a film. He loved doing it apparently, but to write the film score as well, which is why you get that beautiful, when we talked about the Dream Ballet in Oklahoma or anything like that, you do start to see the early inklings of that during that beautiful deer hunt sequence.
Yeah.
When this movie stops being a bawdy musical and just becomes this really well shot, really engrossing, beautifully scored hunt. But it's the idea of sitting down and saying, let's, there was a real thought on Mamoulian's part of actually making this thing a cohesive vision for the viewer. And the idea of, you're talking about writing your musicals for who is in the audience for your musicals. I think what Mamoulian does that's so good with this film, and is not the case with a lot of other musicals. So in some of the other ones, in some of the earlier films, Chevalier just looks directly into camera and sings, right?
Right.
Or talks to the audience directly. There's one I was watching where he's just going like, well, you, hello, you thought that was my wife. No, that was my cousin. My wife is over here. He's just doing a whole bit. But with this, the decision got made, which I thought was very smart, was he just decided, like, we're making a musical. We can still make a musical, but I want to make a musical that feels like a movie, as opposed to, and what I love, though, which is so great, the Isn't It Romantic sequence is kind of the epitome of that, because it's doing something you couldn't do in a stage show, right? Like, you can, obviously, in a stage show, you can have characters in different places. You mentioned Sweeney Todd. Mm-hmm. And you can have all these characters who are supposed to be in different places singing Joanna or whatever you want to do, but they're all on the stage. This, doing that editing is so good. But even prior to that, one thing I loved, so Chevalier in his other musicals will look into the camera and sing to the audience, right? We don't want to do that in this movie. We want to be a film. Right. So what do? When he starts singing Isn't It Romantic, he's sitting by his 3-angle mirror in the shop, and we have the camera pan to the first pane of the mirror, where he's a little off to the side. Then the middle pane, so you can still get him looking directly into camera and talking to the audience, but done in a way that does not break the language of the film.
Damn, I didn't notice that. That's awesome.
And then what I love is, so he does the first pane, the second pane, so Chevalier's head on, the third pane, and then Chevalier himself. So it's this just, it's one of those shots you look at. You know, we talked about Spielberg's West Side Story, and just certain choices he makes in that Tom and I were talking about as soon as it came out, of like the way he has them walking through, you know, walking through the town during the opening little, I forget what it's called, the
or even just the shot that everyone online just went nuts about is Tony singing, you know, I just met a girl named he's standing in a puddle, and you just notice the fucking lights start spinning around him, and it's like, holy shit. I always would have thought, directors weren't thinking enough about these things when they were, but I think Kyle's right in that they're overthinking it, because they think, all right, we're translating this thing to the cinema. Let's try to make it feel like that thing. So how do we shoot it to feel like that? And you go, no, that's the incorrect thing to do, because you're gonna make a boring fucking movie. 1, 2, you're also probably gonna lose the magic of seeing the performers dancing, which, you know, Spielberg did. He when you like watch that movie, you go, that movie's a technical masterpiece. How the fuck did he pull it off? But then you also just look at it and go, he very simply just thought, show these people dancing.
Right.
Move the camera to heighten the movements, to heighten the emotions, but always see what they're doing. Because as much as this stuff, you know, originates from the stage, and it's still, you know, with as much as you guys are saying it's a dying art form, and, you know, these producers are fucking killing it, it still exists. But when you get a guy like Spielberg, when you get a guy like Frank Oz, or whatever, the ones that work, it's pure cinema. It's when it's done in a way that you can only see in a movie, because you can't do the camera moves that Spielberg did. You couldn't have the giant fucking, you know, killer plant in Little Shop of Horrors doing all this shit, attacking a city at the end and destroying the world. It's just pure cinema, and so many, and you're right, so many of these guys overthink it, try to make it feel like, oh well, you know, the people in Tennessee can't get to the city to see it, so let's try to make it feel like they're on Broadway. No, that's not what they want. That's the wrong thing. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, like Mike said, Rouben Mamoulian, Julia Gulia, you know,
another
he was,
epic musical film.
he had the right idea of like, no, we're not just going to do a one-to-one transition. We're going to bring it into the cinema. We're going to make it something that you can't see on the stage. And anytime a director thinks that way, I mean, that seems like it's always the right choice. But hey, that's just me. Also, I just wanted to another point. I never thought of this, but you're right about writing the music to be experienced in the play. Because when Hamilton was big, everyone's like, oh my God, I'm listening to the soundtrack. It's so good. And I tried to listen to it. I'm like, I can't listen to this because I feel like I need to see what the fuck is happening. And then by the time I finally saw it, when they dumped it on Disney Plus, I was like, holy shit, this is good. He wrote it to be experienced, not to just listen to it when you're commuting to work and you're half listening to it. It's something that is part and parcel of the experiment.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but what you just said is literally to a T what Dear Evan Hansen was written to be. Was you half listen on your way to work.
In fact, it's got the opposite problem where I remember Dear Evan Hansen, like when it played on the Tonys or something like that, and they all sang You Will Be Found, and you're like, oh, this must be really inspirational. And you kind of just went like, oh, I bet this is touching. And I think a lot of people, I remember when the trailer came out and a bunch of people were going, he's not gay, thought that was what it was about.
Right.
Thought it was just like,
no, there were articles that came out, like movie about gay teen to be adapted.
And it's like, no, they're all singing this. Tom, do you know what the plot of that movie is, right? Or the plot of that show?
Well, I learned about it when everyone started clowning on the 50-year-old guy playing the main character.
The overthinking thing that you said, like they're trying so hard to hide that he's not actually 18, that he looks like he's 112 years old.
Own it, you know, own what age he was or whatever. I think.
Yeah,
especially because they're like casting around him like people that actually look of the age. So you're like looking at this old. It's the 30 Rock gif. Hello, fellow young people.
Yeah.
Sorry, Michael. And I cut him off.
No, it's
it's a movie about a kid who's a loser, and some weirdo's like, hey, like, you're writing notes, I'm gonna take your note, and then he kills himself, and everyone thinks he's his best friend, and he fakes that and cons the guy's sister into being his girlfriend, and everyone loves him, and it's basically that Robin Williams
Just
movie
a
he made with
relatable
Bobcat
teen
Goldthwait.
movie. Just something we all become of age.
Speaking of gaslighting, I mean, who doesn't love that good old American high school tradition of gaslighting an entire school after some guy kills himself into making yourself the main character of the story?
Right.
So yeah, but I mean, the thing that's interesting about it in that regard is when it comes to just the musical in general and what it can do. I think the mistake that something like Dear Evan Hansen makes, like, those songs sound like good musical songs that don't actually convey the feelings in that moment. You Will Be Found is a song that should play inspirationally at one point and not the faked suicide note of a depressed teen. So, I say all that to say the best musicals are, it's not just that the songs are catchy, I think. The best movie musicals, too. Not just that the songs are catchy, it's that the feeling is infectious. And I think that I say that because there were a lot of songs in Love Me Tonight, and there were a lot of songs in other Chevalier musicals that I think are fine. And as much as we like the opening sequence of the film and so on, I think the reason Isn't It Romantic really sticks out and taps into what a good movie musical does is that it's not just that the melody is catchy, it's conveying a feeling. It's conveying a feeling of being in love. It's conveying a feeling of not just being in love, but feeling the infectious feeling of love. Not just like, oh, I've met the love of my life, but like the feeling you feel when, like, you see a young couple in love and you just feel a swoon. The movie musicals that we love use music to convey an emotion that we otherwise can't put into words. There is no monologue that you can give a character that feels as good as The Way You Look Tonight in Top Hat does. Or Isn't It a Lovely Day to Get Caught in the Rain in Swing Time, which we did earlier. Or on the opposite side of things, to quote a movie that Tom loves dearly, there is no monologue that you could give Michael Paré
I was just
that is going to feel as cathartic.
Yes.
That is going to feel as cathartic as when, she's singing Tonight Is What It Means to Be Young, and he's watching her, and the lyrics are not about that. And the music is not about that. And yet, when you combine those images and those lyrics and that music, it sticks with you. Isn't It Romantic sticks out from this film, not just because, hey, it's a great sequence that it goes from sounding like a hum to a military march to a Romani, number to an opera. It's the fact that it sticks with you. And I think that that's something that a good movie musical can do, is help you access feelings that you didn't otherwise know how to say.
It's like we were saying, it's part and parcel with the whole package. It's more than about like the emotion. It's about, in this story, the emotion is so overwhelming. The only way you can get it out is to sing it, whatever the emotion is. And I don't know. It's like the conversation we had singing in the rain, and all the shit we've been saying today. So many of these, so many of the worst musicals don't really get the whole package, and they kind of just go for the shock and awe and don't go for a cohesion. But I feel like Kyle's. I think we're about ready to get Kyle to bed.
No, it isn't. I thought what you were saying was genuinely making me think about. I was moved during Isn't It Romantic, and that was a romantic put my head on his shoulder, because
I'm like all business.
No, I'm really enjoying what you're saying. Please don't let me.
Did anybody else have anything specific they wanted to touch on before we wrapped up talking about how this film did at the Academy Awards? I mean, if not, I do want to spotlight two gags that I love that we didn't talk about. Well, besides the line about if that painting on the wall had ears, it would drop, and then it drops and sings. Singing painting puppet is amazing.
We both shrieked when that happened.
Amazing gag. Also during that sequence, when the three aunts, the three women that we talked about, the three Macbeth women, they all go, oh, 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 and then a tiny dog woofs. Great,
It's
great
so
editing
good.
bit.
It's so good because I thought they sounded like dogs before it happened,
Mhm.
and then I was worried my dog was gonna bark because they sounded like dogs. And then that moment happened, and I was like, it was self-aware. They knew they sounded like dogs.
And then the last bit that I did love, because it's this movie doesn't have a lot of like quick wordplay bits like you would later see in films like Sullivan's Travels or any of the Howard Hawks comedies. But there is one quick exchange of dialogue that I loved, which is just, she's on the horse chasing after the train, and you get the exchange, "Stop this train. What's the reason? I love him. That's not a railroad problem." Beautiful. Great.
That was
Great gag.
It was a great strip of dialogue. Yeah.
I thought she was gonna die. I kind of wanted her to die.
Yeah, we were like, just like Pa. But no, there's so much I want to say because we tapped into the things that I could go on for hours about. And I shouldn't. But I will say what you were just saying, Tom and Mike, both of you were touching on conveying a feeling that can't be expressed in a monologue. I mean, that in a nutshell is why I love the art form and why I wish people understood it better.
It's interesting too. Like, I think we both have a newfound appreciation for musical film when it's done really well, just from having worked on for like the past year now, like an entire season of musical television show, you know, and like really focusing on that and trying to entertain the audience, and we have a message that we're trying to say, but how can we say it in a way that is entertaining to people who are watching television as well? It's like a mix of a mockumentary style and a musical, which like you don't think would go together, but then it just somehow does, or at least I think it does. And so
we didn't know if it would when we came up with that idea, but it's everything we're talking about here today. The reason why we're so passionate about it, the reason why I could talk and talk and talk and talk, is because this is what we do, and it's really high stakes for us. Like I don't want the art form to die, because then everything I've been putting my whole person into is over. Not that it's gonna die overnight, but what you're saying about Active Faith. So our show is a musical, and we decided that a couple days before the first table read, which was a couple days before we shot the pilot, because there was a sequence where there's a musical theater writer and they were singing his song, and we were like, should this be a musical sequence, or should they just stand there and sing it a cappella and as the characters in the story? And we decided to make the show a musical because we're like The Office, but it's also Glee, hasn't been done before, and we want to do something that like no one's done yet. And that was what finally we all were on the same page. Let's make it a musical. And it's the best part of Active Faith is that it's a musical. Right. But we had to get artful about every song, about the rules, about, well, how do you in a pilot set up and give yourself permission to do all the things we wanted to do with musical storytelling later. And I feel like we did it. What we came up with sets it up for the rest of the season.
It's a gag, but it's also like a very heartfelt gag. You know what I mean? It's about these two characters who are, interested in each other, and they're saying, the title of the song is "Fruit for You," and it's about being gay, but it's also about being like.
It's also about Gertrude Stein's bananas in her kitchen. And it's also about, we call it the pink scare, and they say, think Red Scare, swap out gays for commies. They work in this like company where you get fired for being gay, and it's a really heavy conversation, really heavy. And then they start singing "I'm a fruit for you," and it becomes funny again. And that's not just writing a musical, it's also just talking about what audiences, what Tom was saying about, you got to make it fun, you got to make it entertaining, and we're losing sight of that in the art form storytelling. But it's I could go on and on to answer your question, Mike. I have like 20 other things I wanted to say.
Let's be clear. You guys are going to have many more chances to opine on the state of the musical. We have plenty more musicals in the registry, so don't you worry about that. Okay. But just to bring us home, if you guys are welcome to guess too, if you don't know this off, like if you didn't look this up. But Tom, how do we think Love Me Tonight fared at the Academy Awards? What do we think it got nominated for? Tom's guess is 0. Did either of you gentlemen want to wager a guess as to how we think Love Me Tonight may have performed at the Academy Awards?
I think it did fine. Yeah,
like one or two awards, I would say. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, that's what I'd say too. I'd say it was low.
Well, the winner here is Tom Love Me Tonight received 0 Academy Award nominations, despite the fact that 2 of Chevalier's films, 1 Hour with You and The Smiling Lieutenant, both received Best Picture nominations the previous year. Dude had 2 movies in the Best Picture category the previous year, did not this year. Now, part of that could be because a different musical really kind of rocked the damn house this year. The Best Picture nominees that year were 42nd Street, A Farewell to Arms, a movie we're doing next season, I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, Lady for a Day, Little Women, The Private Life of Henry VIII, She Done Him Wrong, Smilin' Through, State Fair, and the winner, Cavalcade. Worth noting, 42nd Street, I Am a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, She Done Him Wrong, and State Fair are all also in the National Film Registry. So those will be films that we're covering down the line. Jeremy and Kyle, Hass and Swanton, thank you guys so much for coming on.
Seriously.
Thank you guys for coming back on.
Great.
And we are absolutely looking forward to having you guys back again next season. We'll take a look at the list once we wrap this one and see what you guys want to swing by for. But it is always a pleasure to have you guys here. It's great to talk to you. We miss you guys, and we hope that we get a chance to hang sometime.
Thank you so much for having us. We love being here. So
this was one of my favorite episodes to record in a long time. So this was great.
Aww. Jeremy, Kyle, thank you guys so much for joining us. And everybody else, stick around because we'll be right back with our picks for the National Film Registry.
The National Film Registry isn't some fixed object, frozen in time. It's always growing, adding new titles every year. These annual selections are made by the National Film Preservation Board, with members like Martin Scorsese, Alfre Woodard, and Leonard Maltin, and representatives from organizations like the Academy, the DGA, and the AFI coming together to debate and decide. But they don't just pull titles out of thin air. They pull from the public, people like you and us, who can submit their nominations for the registry in a form on the Library of Congress's website. What we do, at the end of each episode, is have Mike and Tom pick films not yet in the registry that they feel should be, inspired by that day's topic. At the end of each season, those films will be formally submitted to the National Film Registry for consideration, on behalf of You're Missing Out. Here are today's picks.
Okay, so my pick was actually something I watched recently, and I wasn't expecting it to kind of tie in so perfectly to this movie. As we talked about, this movie is very goofy, very light. There's a lot of great gags. It feels very Looney Tunes. And this movie I watched recently is very much that. It's Top Secret, starring Val Kilmer, his first movie, I believe. And it's from the team that did Airplane. And it's just... it is so goddamn funny. It is so goofy. It's a riff on those, like, 50s, like, oh, I'm a musician doing these, like, it's like like making fun of the Elvis movies, and he's like a spy. He's like a musician, but he gets caught up in a Nazi like spy plot. But like the song at the beginning that he sings is like, "And we're gonna go surfing with our ski guns too," and it's and just from there, it's just absolute nonsense. One of my favorite gags in the movie is they're trying to get away from the Nazis, and they like get trapped in a room, and they look out the window to see if they can escape, and they look down, and it's the typical like shot of like, here's like a miniature of the cityscape we did with the car, like little toy cars driving by, but there's just hamsters running around. It's just like that's and it's just so funny. It's so light and goofy and cartoonish and very much in the vein of this movie. And I know Airplane is in the registry, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
If not, it should be, but I believe it is. And I think this movie is just as good as Airplane, and it's got a different flavor to it, and it just shows that those guys in the 80s were maybe the best comedy guys going at the time. And my pick is Top Secret.
So I was thinking about this film and what it is and what makes it special. And my pick is not it's not a musical per se, but it has the energy of a musical. And I also think it has other qualities that are in line with Love Me Tonight. One is the fact that it is a very goofy comedy. Bits just happen. Another is it's built around a star. and that star persona, that it's not a case of necessarily you're going to a movie to see, a radical new character. You're going because you know the star and you want to see what antics he gets up to, right? He's got a signature look and a signature voice and a signature style, and you just want to see what he does in all these incidents. There's also a case of the fact that this is a movie that I look at the same way Love Me Tonight. I mean, we know that there were Chevalier films before Love Me Tonight. They're not in the registry because Rouben Mamoulian, who is really a horror director, prior to this, had done Jekyll and Hyde. I should say he's not entirely a horror director, but done Jekyll and Hyde, comes in and takes that kind of horror aesthetic to this big, goofy comedy, and it amplifies it so much. That's the same case with my registry pick. And as I mentioned, things just happen. Silly things just happen in this movie, and they're just great bits, and they're never explained. They're just absurd acts for absurdity. Same in my registry pick. For example, there is no reason why a group of bikers should be assuaged by a man in a gray suit and white shoes getting up on the bar and dancing to the song Tequila. My pick for the National Film Registry is 1985's Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Much like a Chevalier film, you are watching this movie because it's Pee-wee, and what is Pee-wee going to get up to? Now, obviously, I know Paul Reubens plays Pee-wee Herman, but even so, it was an established character, and you're just there to see what antics he gets up to. There is a lot of just goofy nonsense that you are willing to go along with because the film is just confident. The Large Marge sequence in another movie maybe doesn't work. The fact that in a scene, Pee-wee can just turn around and go, "Oh, really? Amazing Larry," and it just cuts to a guy with a mohawk who has never been introduced before. That all works, and part of the reason that works is anybody else directing that movie, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, it's forgettable, right? The same way that, Love Me Tonight could have just been another Ernst Lubitsch, Maurice Chevalier film on the rails, but Mamoulian really improves that film, and I think that it's Burton's clarity of vision and Burton's gothic horror sensibilities, much like Mamoulian brought from Jekyll and Hyde, that really elevates it. I mean, Pee-wee's Big Adventure is a classic film. It's an iconic film that's a lot better than it has any right to be. Again, like Love Me Tonight, it is a classic comedy built around a star persona. Pee-wee's Big Adventure should absolutely be in the National Film Registry.
Let's all go to the lobby, lobby, lobby.
Thank you again to Jeremy and Kyle for joining us. Next week, we're discussing one of the most highly acclaimed dramas of the 1930s. Comet Over Hollywood's Jessica Pickens joins us for 1936's Dodsworth. Don't forget to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again next time. Here on You're Missing Out.
They honor movies of historical, cultural, or aesthetic importance on the National Film Registry.